Hey everybody, this is Michael Goldstein from SwitchPitch. Thank you so much for joining our webinar on corporate and startup partnerships, tangible tactics for making the relationships work. I am really excited to be here with a great panel of people that are experts on this topic, and also have a great moderator who is probably the biggest expert on the topic, Scott Kirshner from Innovation Leader.
That they exist and maybe communicate to other corporates that they exist. So think about helping the startup, not just how they can help you. The last thing is about reducing red tape in your company and bureaucracy and all the barriers that exist to getting a pilot going, helping the startup get some revenue and eventually scale up.
Identify startups and keep track of them. And so the beginning is who's out there and what are they doing? Let's just get some benchmarks going here. And there are a lot of different places that you can get startup relationship introductions. So accelerators are a great one. Dream It Ventures is focused on healthcare. They're a great accelerator program. 500 Startups. A lot of these are probably groups that either you know of or currently work with because they're very active in the startup engagement space, especially like the Dream It's of the world and 500 Startups, where they're actively looking for large companies to work with the startup cohort. So accelerators usually make a small investment in startups, invite them in, teach them best practices, and then they're off to the races. The other one that is often referenced in my conversations with big companies are universities. So I listed some of the local ones here in Washington. Georgetown has a great program, as does University of Maryland, but there's tons that are local to you, I'm sure. Then this one's often overlooked. Other big companies, other like-minded big companies are a great way to exchange startup information and relationships. So telecom, we have a telecom client that's part of a consortium of other telecoms. They swap information about startups that are interesting. Geographically, they're non-competitive usually in these consortiums. So if you can find complementary other large companies, they're great at swapping if they're open to it and if it's not competitive. And then venture funds. Venture funds are eager to create value for their portfolio and oftentimes hand over those kinds of relationships. And then it comes down to the customer distribution. How do we scale this thing? Now that we've tested it internally, maybe it's ultimately only an internal tool like the HR City Challenge.
Right. So we talk about 3 steps to corporate engagement. So these are pretty tactical, but there's definitely a preparation, implementation, and then review and repeat. It's your thing. And even if you have a 1-year budget, it's important to know where the program's going. So this is just an example of if we have a 3-year timeline, for example, what is that? What does that look like? So how do we know in the first year did we achieve what we wanted to achieve, and in the second year, and in the third year? And so what does that progression look like? And so you have to look at where you are now and how does that go? And so you know, Chick-fil-A and Cube came together. They were just, they really had already gotten started. Where do you find the startups? SwitchPitch, for example, VCs, accelerators, incubators, all those things that Michael talked about at the beginning, at the open, the discovery part of the funnel. Selecting, so do you have selection criteria? Do you have the ability to assess, do a technical review internally? Do you have a business case? Do you know what you're trying to achieve? And does this fit with that? And then mobilizing, so getting the resources together, figuring out how much funding you want to apply. Is it a combination of the innovation team and the business team funding a particular project just to as a way to keep the startup inside the company? So how does that work? Is there a project plan and a roadmap? Do you actually know what the timelines are and what has to be delivered and when? And know if you're in a technical evaluation, if that's if it's different than a commercial engagement, what evaluation criteria do you need continuously? So some startups can come with suggestions about KPIs. Some startups really just don't. But if the business knows what KPIs they're after and can define it, and there's stages of KPIs. So in the proof of concept, you might have a different set of KPIs than you have in the scale portion. So think about different ways that the startups are moving along with you. And then minimizing the IT requirements. Somebody said earlier, I think Scott, was the long security document that we throw over to startups. And you know, the security document help the corporate engage. So the closer a startup can get to proposing a specific pilot or proof of concept or making a quick offer, a brief offer in the very first meeting is very helpful. Even if it's not where we end up, it's great for the corporate to see an example of how a startup could be engaging. Propose the business case structure. So here's how you would make money. Here's how we would fulfill those capabilities that you don't have, and so what does that look like? Recommend KPIs, so I've been talking about KPIs the whole time, and be responsive to requests.
These are core business challenges, so we engage the startup community around these 4. If they don't have technology that relate to these, we want to be respectful, but we have no plans to engage because we don't want to waste their time, and we got to build internal credibility as well. You see on the next slide that we are knocking on a lot of doors. We're looking at a lot of folks. We select a decent size, you know, at 5, 8, 7% type number to do a deeper dive, more understand their offer, press to see who else has got similar options. And then the next slide is we're trying to track the information, our innovation dashboard, about what part of the business are we serving, what business challenges are we working on, and you know what kind of pilots do we have in the works. You see the next slide. They're not that different than what anybody else is going to look at, but real progress with legal, real progress with IT, and then bridges built to project managers are what we're finding to be the critical.
Time on wrapping up. It's 11:30. Hope you got a lot of value out of today's webinar, and we will have the recording. We'll send you a link so that you can share it internally. And thanks from our whole panel, and appreciate you attending.
Thanks, everyone.